From analog
Hi, Jim. You've a great signal up here. You're 5.9 plus.
to digital,
We are everywhere you want to be. This is the CQ Blind Hams Podcast.
Hello to every one of my ham radio friends. This is Robert, NC5R. Thank you so much for tuning in to this CQ Blind Hams Podcast. This particular podcast has a rather unusual title with two parts to it. The podcast is entitled Mental Gymnastics Not Required, the Accessible GD77 Firmware with Custom Voice Prompts. In a few minutes, I'm going to take a deep dive into the second half of the title, which is, again, the Accessible GD77 Firmware with Custom Voice Prompts. But before I do that, I want to build a case for using custom voice prompts by discussing the first half of the title, which again is Mental Gymnastics Not Required. By the time I was about 10 years old, I was heavily into CB radio, and I had made a ton of friends with the local CBers in my community. All of them were sighted, except for me. I'm totally blind and have been since birth. Of course, that was no problem on the radio because everybody is using audio on the radio. Where I discovered it was more of an issue, though, was I discovered that it was much more difficult for me to operate my radio than it was for my sighted CB friends. If they wanted to know what channel they were on, it was no problem to glance at the radio and see what the channel was. Or if they needed to read something on the S meter, no problem. But for me, I had to come up with all kinds of workarounds to try to figure out what channel I was on. Sometimes that meant listening to the traffic on the channel to see how busy it was or see if the typical people who hung out on a particular channel were there. Sometimes it meant trying to figure out where the channel knob was oriented based on where the little screw hole in the knob was pointing. Sometimes it meant counting channels to try to get the correct channel that way. Constant mental gymnastics were required to operate my CB radio, and I began to realize that my sighted CB friends weren't having to use all these mental gymnastics. They were just able to relax and enjoy their radio. All that was in 1966. Let's fast forward about 56 years to the present. It was after I installed and started using the Accessible GD77 Firmware that I realized one day, wow, I'm not having to do all these mental gymnastics to operate my radio. It wasn't hard to tell what my power level was, or what channel I was on, or which PL tone I was using, because the radio told me all that information without me having to try to do some workaround to figure it out. Didn't have to do mental gymnastics. And the thing about mental gymnastics is when the brain is doing those, it's not able to relax and enjoy the pleasure of operating ham radio. The other thing that I realized after I installed the Accessible GD77 Firmware was that I took a radio out of the box that was 100% not accessible. All I did was replace the firmware and install voice prompts, and an inaccessible radio suddenly became 100% accessible. This made me realize that the manufacturer of the radio, instead of installing their inaccessible firmware at the factory, they could have installed firmware that had accessibility built into it, and the radio would have been accessible for me right out of the box. But ham radio manufacturers have never, in the 56 years that I've been playing with radios have never made accessible firmware as much of a priority as I would like to see them do, and that's most unfortunate. In fact, most of the accessibility advances that I've seen made in ham radio have happened by the work of other hams, a lot of times blind hams, who have developed tools that make radios and other equipment much more accessible. Thinking about Jim Schaefer and JJ Radio, he demonstrated that one can install some software on a computer that he wrote, plug your radio into it, and you can have way more accessibility on a lot of radios than you would have otherwise. I think about Rob Santello and the Ham Pod. This is a piece of hardware that Rob developed that gives a number of radios, a number of amplifiers, tuners, meters, accessibility that they don't otherwise have. These are wonderful accomplishments that these people have made, all for the purpose of trying to reduce the number of mental gymnastics that blind people have to go through to operate their radio. Once again, this is the case with the Accessible GD77 firmware. A man by the name of Joseph Stephen, VK7JS, who is also a blind ham, realized that there were a group of radios that could run open source firmware. He started taking a look at this open source firmware, and he saw that it had some accessibility features built into it, but he realized that he could greatly enhance the accessibility of this open source firmware and make these radios operate in a much more accessible manner, again, reducing the mental gymnastics that a blind person has to go through to operate their radio. Congratulations, Joe. It's been my pleasure to watch this accessible firmware mature and to see how exciting it gets with every release, where it gets easier and easier to operate these radios. It is so very cool what you're doing in this arena. Earlier, I mentioned briefly that when you install the Accessible GD77 firmware, you also have to install a voice prompts package. And I want to be really clear that the voice prompts package is not the same thing as installing a screen reader like you would install on your computer or on your smartphone. The voice prompts package that you install is only capable of speaking words that have been programmed for it. So Joe or someone had to program all of the words into the firmware that the radio needs to say, to tell you all the menu options and to tell you the various things that you need to know to operate the radio. And that's really great to a point. The problem comes in when we get these radios, I'm talking about blind hams like myself, and we install the Accessible GD7 firmware and the voice prompts. Usually the next thing we do is install a code plug, which gives the radio all of our channel names and our contact names, among other things. And the problem with that is that the radio doesn't know how to say most of the words that make up our channel names and our contact names. So what the voice prompt does when it encounters a string of text that it doesn't have a word for, it just spells that text out. So, for example, if you have a contact name in your contacts list, Johnny Smith's repeater, if you don't, you should, and if you arrow to that contact in your DTMF contacts list, what will happen is the radio will spell the name Johnny Smith's repeater. And your brain will immediately go from that relaxed state of enjoying ham radio to having to do the mental gymnastics of trying to remember, okay, now what is it spelling? Oh yeah, Johnny Smith's repeater. So you've already been taken out of your enjoyment mode, and now you're in your mental gymnastics mode. And that's not the way most of us want to enjoy amateur radio. So realizing this, Joe Stephen developed a system for the Accessible GD77 firmware, which allows you to record a custom voice prompt using your own voice to replace that string of text that the voice prompt only knows how to spell out. So if I were to record a voice prompt that said Johnny Smith's repeater, and I associated that recording with the spelled out text Johnny Smith's repeater in my contacts list, then the firmware knows when it encounters that text string, rather than spell it out, simply play the recording that I made saying Johnny Smith's repeater. So when you hear the recording and it's just words, you realize I don't have to go into mental gymnastics mode and try to figure out what's going on. I just know that it's Johnny Smith's repeater. I can relax, continue enjoying my ham radio. I can press the menu button to have the DTMF string connect me to Johnny Smith's repeater. I can engage in a very pleasant QSO with Johnny Smith in E5 Lima. It puts him in a good mood. It puts all the other people on the repeater in a good mood. And I've done the ham radio community a service. But if it's spelling out Johnny Smith's repeater and I'm having to go through the frustration of trying to reorient my brain and I connect to the repeater in a bad mood, that puts NE5 Lima in a bad mood and everybody else on the repeater in a bad mood. And I've done a disservice to the amateur radio community. So the point is, we want to do everything we can in accessibility to reduce the amount of mental gymnastics that we have to do that distracts us from the pleasure of our amateur radio hobby. Now let's take a deep dive into what these accessible custom voice prompts are all about, and I'll show you how they work and how to create them for yourself. Here we go. I want to begin the demonstration part of the podcast by showing you what custom voice prompts sound like on my GD77 radio. And true accessibility with the GD77 accessible firmware starts the moment that you flip the switch to turn the radio on. So the first thing I'm going to do is simply turn my radio on and let you hear what happens.
NC5R channel clear mode FM.
As you can see, you get a lot of information when the radio first comes on. You heard a little tone that lets you know the radio is powering up. You heard my call sign, which lets you know that it's my radio. And you heard channel clear node, which is the channel the radio is sitting on. And then you heard mode FM, which lets you know the mode that the radio is in on this channel. So you get a lot of information just by turning the radio on. And this is the kind of accessibility you can count on with the GD77 accessible firmware. Now, I'm going to just go through the 8 channels that are on my radio and let you hear the channel names and the information that's announced as I go through them. So here we go, just arrowing up through the 8 channels.
Channel clear 0 mode FM. Channel Charlie Culver's repeater mode FM. Channel Wayne Pacina's repeater mode DMR contact WORLDWIDE. Channel A&M repeater mode FM. Channel A&M repeater DMR mode DMR contact STATEWIDE. channel. Brian Radio Club repeater, mode FM, channel. Charlie Powell's repeater, mode FM, channel. Clear node, mode FM.
So we're back to clear node. So you can see that in that channel naming scheme, there is a combination of my voice saying the channel name and then the synthetic voice from the voice prompt that is installed on my radio saying some more information about that channel. And some of the information, especially on the DMR channels that you heard, the voice prompt spelled that information. I could set up custom voice prompt names for each of those DMR contacts, but at this point I haven't done that. They're still being spelled, but that gives you a flavor for what it sounds like when you actually arrow up and down your channel list on your radio and you have these custom voice prompts set up. I'm going to now arrow through my contacts list on my GD77. These are DTMF contacts, just so that you can hear what they sound like with custom voice prompts.
DTMF contact list menu. Disconnect. Freestar. Coffee break net. Lunch bunch. Shut down clear node. Reboot clear node. Enable incoming connections. Disable incoming connections. Parrot off. Parrot on. Status. Time. Professional Loafers Net. East Coast Reflector. Blind Hams. Disconnect.
Now we're back to disconnect. So you can see that all of these DTMF contacts have voice labels, which makes it really easy to tell exactly what they do. Nothing is spelled. It's all spoken clearly with a well-recorded voice prompt that I recorded. All right, I've got my GD77 radio with me here, and I'm going to demonstrate for you how to use the radio itself to create a DTMF contact and then to add a custom voice prompt to that contact. And you may remember that when I let you hear my DTMF contacts, there was one in there called Freestar. So what I've done is I've gone in and deleted the Freestar contact and deleted its associated voice prompt so that I can recreate them for demonstration purposes. I'm going to go into the menus on my GD77.
Menu. Contacts.
I'm going to go into contacts.
Contacts. Menu. DTMF contact list.
I'm going to go into the DTMF contact list.
DTMF contact list. Menu. Disconnect.
I'm now on a contact called disconnect. I'm going to press menu one more time to get into the quick menu.
Quick menu. Select contact.
And that lets me have the choice of select a contact,
New contact.
new contact,
Edit contact.
edit a contact,
Delete contact.
delete a contact,
DTMF entry.
enter a DTMF entry, but I'm going to go to new contact
Select contact. New contact.
and I'm going to press the menu key on that.
New contact. Name.
I'm now on a name field where I can enter the name of my new contact. I'm going to do that using the T9 style telephone entry on the keypad of the GD77. So now I'm going to enter the name Freestar.
D E F F T Q R R D E E D E E T Q R S S T T A A P Q R
I'm going to play it back and make sure I got it entered correctly.
F R E E S T A R alphanumeric.
Sounds good. So now I'm going to go down to the other field in this new contact screen, and I'm going to enter the code for the Freestar network.
Code.
This is the code that will be dialed to connect me to the Freestar networks.
Star 3 2 1 9 6.
I'm going to double check, make sure I entered that correctly.
Star 3 2 1 9 6 numeric.
I'm now going to press menu to save this contact.
Contact save. DTMF contact list menu.
Disconnect.
So now that we have the contact created, I'm going to create a custom voice prompt, which will allow me to have this contact spoken rather than spelled. Because if I go to the contact now in my contacts list, what you'll hear is
FREESTAR.
Freestar spelled out. And we don't want it to be that way every time you arrow through the list. So I'm going to fix that by adding a custom voice prompt that says the word Freestar. In the Accessible GD77 firmware, we have something called prompt review mode. It's actually more than just a review mode. It will let you edit a voice prompt, let you save them, let you re-record them if you want to. And so it's just called prompt review, but you can do a whole lot while you're in there. So now I'm going to go into the prompt review mode.
Prompt review mode on, 2, none.
And it said prompt review mode on, 2, none, which means I'm currently sitting on slot 22 out of 32 possible voice prompt slots. I am going to arrow down one time so that you can hear what is in slot 21.
2, 1.
Coffee break net.
Equals W6EK.
So what you heard there was coffee break net and equals W6EK. And this is what you get when you use prompt review mode and you arrow up and down through your voice prompts. You'll hear the voice prompt spoken, then you'll hear the text string that's associated with that voice prompt. So coffee break net equals W6EK means W6EK is the text string that will trigger the speaking of coffee break net in my own voice. So whenever the firmware encounters W6EK, it will automatically say coffee break net. And this works because the only place that I have W6EK listed in the firmware is in my DTMF contacts list. I'm going to go back up to item 22 now, which has nothing in it.
2, none.
This is a good spot for me to record my new Freestar voice prompt. So what I'm going to do now is simply speak that voice prompt into the radio after issuing the command to record Freestar. Now I'm going to play that back just to see what it sounds like.
Freestar.
Sounds pretty good, but I can maybe improve on it a little bit if I save it and then go into the little voice editor and have it trim the silence at the beginning and end of this recording. So I'm going to save it.
2.
Freestar.
Prompt save.
Now I'm going to go into the little editor.
Edit voice hack on.
I'm going to press the command to trim the silence.
Freestar.
That makes it sound a little better, doesn't it?
Freestar.
There's still a little bit of silence or something at the beginning, which I'm not crazy about. And so it's certainly possible to do even finer editing and trim it manually. I'm not going to go through that right here for the purpose of this demonstration. Learning to edit voice prompts is something you can do on your own if that's something that you would like to do. So I'm going to save this voice prompt now and get out of the voice editor part.
Edit voice hack out.
I'm now going to go back into prompt review mode.
Prompt review mode on, 2.
Freestar.
Now that I'm still on my prompt 22 Freestar, I can go ahead from right here and add the text string that I want to associate with this voice prompt. So again, I'm going to type in the word Freestar.
D-E-F-F-T-Q-R-R.
Let's double check it and make sure I got it typed in correctly.
Freestar, alphanumeric.
Sounds right to me. So now I can simply press the menu key to save all this.
Freestar, prompt save.
Now, if I go back into prompt review mode,
Prompt review mode, 1, 2, 2. Freestar equals Freestar.
so now you see I have it all saved the way that I need it to be so that I can use this contact now. So let's go to our contacts menu and see if it works.
DTMF contact list menu. Disconnect.
I'm going to arrow up and see if we have Freestar now.
Freestar.
Yes, we do. If I press menu on this item here, because I'm in the quick DTMF menu right now, if I press menu on this item, it should dial the touch tones that will cause the node to connect to the Freestar network.
From 2E0, Radio Alpha Foxtrot, no problem there. Yeah, the reason why I'm so good is I'm only about a mile away from the repeater, so the repeater's not too far away from me.
So, as you can see, we just connected right up to the Freestar network, and someone was talking away on there. So that's just a demonstration of how to use the GD77 to create a custom voice prompt and associate it with a DTMF contact. I want to do one more demonstration, and it's going to be the same thing that I've already done, except this time I'm going to do it on a different radio. I'm going to do it on the GD77 Sierra, which, as I mentioned earlier, is rather different from the other radios in this family, in that the GD77 Sierra doesn't have a keypad, doesn't have a display either for that matter, but the only buttons that are on the GD77 Sierra are the volume on-off knob, which is one knob like it is on the other radios, the channel knob, the push-to-talk button on the left side, and the two side key buttons, SK1 and SK2 underneath the PTT, and the orange button, which is on top of the radio next to the antenna. Those are all the buttons that you have to work with the Accessible GD77 firmware on this radio. But Joe has made it possible to do the kind of keypad entry that you would normally do on a radio with a keypad by creating a virtual keypad on the GD77 Sierra that you operate by using the tuning knob along with the SK2 and SK1 keys to get various information. Honestly, it's a little bit like playing a musical instrument doing this on the GD77 Sierra, but with a little bit of practice, you can get quite good and quite fast at entering data into the GD77 Sierra buffer. So what I want to do is the same demo that I did on the GD77, but this time using the virtual keypad of the GD77 Sierra. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a new contact in my DTMF contacts list. And again, I'm going to use the Freestar network for continuity's sake. So I'm going to kind of talk you through how I do this, but not go into great detail about the keypad functions, because that's something that you can get from the documentation. So let's give this a try. I'm sitting at the channel menu on my GD77S, and the way that you change to different modes with this radio is by pressing the orange button. So I'm going to press the orange key until I get to the virtual keypad mode.
Channel mode. Scan. Stop. Keypad mode. VFO 0441.0 megahertz.
Now I'm in the virtual keypad mode, and in this mode you have a choice of whether you're going to be working with a VFO A, VFO B, or with a particular channel. In this case, right now VFO A is selected, but it doesn't matter for my purposes right now whether it's VFO A, B, or a channel that's selected, because I'm actually not going to be interacting on any of those things. I'm simply going to be entering what I need to enter to store a contact into my DTMF contact database. So what I'm going to do is enter the command that you need to enter to create a new contact. And just to tell you before I do it so that you know, that command is the letters AC, which stands for add contact, followed by the name that you want the contact to have, which in my case will be Freestar, followed by a space, then followed by the code that needs to be dialed for this contact, which in this case will be *32196. So now I'm just going to enter this information using the virtual keypad.
A C C E F F V T S R 1 B C D E U S R Q T 3 D A Q R A C F R E E S T A R.
So as you can see, I entered the information correctly using the virtual keypad. I now have Freestar entered. I'm going to go enter a space.
Z space.
And I'm going to enter the code that I need to use to dial this contact.
Hash. Star. 6323 3 2 2 1 1 8 9 9 6 6 A C F R E E S T A R space star 32196.
So I've now got the information entered correctly. So I'm going to press and hold the orange button, and that will save this contact.
F R E E S T A R contact save.
So now I should have this contact in my DTMF contact list. I can go back to that.
DTMF contact list mode. F R E E S T A R.
If I go down one,
Coffee break net.
I'm on the coffee break net. I go back up one, I'm on
F R E E S T A R.
on Freestar. So now we've got the Freestar contact entered into the database, and I can now go and create the appropriate custom voice prompt. Now the GD77 Sierra has an extra menu that the other radios don't have to provide some options that you can't do any other way other than through a menu like this. And so that's where we will find the ability to do the same kind of editing, recording, reviewing of voice prompts that we were doing on the GD77 radio. So I'm going to use the orange key to take me over to option 2 menu.
Filter mode. Vox. Options 1 mode. Options 2 mode. Phonetic spell out.
Now on options 2, and it's said phonetic spell off. You can turn on phonetic spell mode and it will say things phonetically instead of just saying the letters. But I'm going to use the tuning knob now and get over to the prompt review area.
DMRID out. Prompt review mode 1.
Disconnect.
Equals DISCONNECT.
So now I'm on disconnect, which is one of the prompts in my list, and I could go through the list and it would tell you the voice prompt and then the text string that is equal to it, or the text string associated with it. So if I up arrow once,
prompt review mode 2.
Blind hams.
Equals DLIND space HAMS.
so I paused the recording while I went through the list of prompts, and I'm now sitting on prompt 21, which is the last slot that I have on my radio that's filled with a voice prompt. I'll play that one for you.
Prompt review mode 2. 1.
Coffee break net.
Equals W6EK.
So that was the one that we had on the other radio as well, the coffee break net. I'll go up to prompt 22,
Prompt review mode 2. None.
and it says none. So what I'm going to do now is go over to the next item in this options 2 menu, which says
PTT prompt.
PTT prompt, which means you can use the PTT as your button to start and end a recording. And so while I'm sitting on the PTT prompt, I'm going to just hold down the PTT button and say the word that I want to use in this prompt, which is Freestar. Freestar. And we should be able to play it back. Let's see what it sounds like.
Freestar.
Okay, so it sounds good enough to me here. We could do the same kind of editing that we did on the other radio if we wanted to. We have the edit options. We could trim the silence if we wanted to. We can try that.
Freestar.
So that trimmed it a little bit and made it sound a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and save this prompt here.
2.
Freestar.
Prompt save.
So now we have the Freestar prompt saved. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add the text that we need associated with this prompt. The way that we'll do that is we'll go back to our virtual keypad and we will enter the command that allows you to save text to a prompt. And that command is *## the number that you would like to save in, the slot number, which in our case is 22, followed by the text that you would like to save and have it associated with this particular voice prompt, which in our case, again, will of course be Freestar. So now I'm going to go over to the virtual keypad and enter that information.
Options 1. Vox. Out. Filter mode. BTMF contact list. Keypad mode. VFOA 441.0 MHz.
So I'm again back on the virtual keypad and it's still showing me that it's pointing to VFOA, but it doesn't matter in this case again because I'm not going to be using either VFOA-B or a channel. I'm simply going to be entering the data for a voice prompt. I'm going to go ahead and start by entering the *## and the number 22 and then the text that I want to be in there.
Star. Hash. 9 4 2 2 2.
Let's see how we're doing so far.
Star. Hash 2 2.
Okay, so now I just need to enter the word Freestar.
C E F F V U T S R R 1 B C D E E E U T S S T T
So let's see how we did.
Star hash 22 FREESTAR.
So now we have it entered the way that we need it to be entered. So we're going to press and long hold the orange key and see if it saves prompt 22.
2
Free star.
prompt save.
All right. So now we got the prompt saved. So if we go to our DTMF contacts list,
DTMF contact list mode.
Free star.
we now have free star in our contacts list. So if I down arrow one,
Coffee break net.
we got the coffee break net. If I go back up, we have.
Free star.
So now we have set up our contact and associated the appropriate voice prompt with it to dial into the Freestar network in the UK. So this is just a demonstration of how this same thing can be done on the GD77 Sierra.
Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and visit www.blindhams.com.